Well, brothers and sisters, let's welcome to CMJ Canada and our study of the Parashah to Shavua, the Torah portion. It's a tradition that whenever we get together and before we do anything in the name of the Lord, we bless his name. And we'll honor that tradition again. So let's pray. Father in heaven, we bless your name. We bless your name because you are good, you are just, you are holy. We delight that you've given us your word. This is a treasure. And we bless your name by reading your word and studying it. And we pray, Lord, that by your spirit, we will bless your name by putting it into practice. We pray, Lord, for your spirit to be in us, around us, through us, amongst us, and continue to teach us and guide us and help us as you promised that he would. We ask this most humbly in the name of our Messiah, Yeshua. Amen. All right. Well, guys, we are still briefly going to be in the book of Leviticus, and then the second Torah portion takes us into the new text of Numbers, or Bamidbar. Leviticus, as those of you who will know, I think is just one of the best books of the Bible. It's constantly showing us the holiness of God and all the really good laws that we've been discussing that people know about and even quote in the Bible are all found in Leviticus. Our Torah portion starts in Leviticus 25, and it starts by saying that the Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord." So we find ourselves still camped at Mount Sinai. We have not moved on. That's coming a little bit later in the next text. And so we're constantly receiving new revelations from the Lord. He's been speaking, teaching, talking to Moses. Moses is writing them down, and then he's transmitting them to the people. And then the phrase, as Moses is preparing his people to enter the Holy Land and set up a just and holy and righteous society that's going to be a light to the nations, then we suddenly understand that the physical land of the Bible is actually connected also to spirituality. And as much as humans get to rest, the land has to also rest. And so we get quite a very detailed description of what we call the Shemitah, the Jubilee year. Now, we've had this Shemitah before in other parts of the Torah, both in Exodus and in Leviticus, but not to this detail where we actually have, these are the things you can do, these are the things you can't do. And we discover that, and then as well as having the land being able to have a rest, there's this constant phrase of taking care of those that fall into poverty. So the first 20 verses or so of Leviticus, it's about making sure that when you get into the text, into the land, that every 7th year there's a rhythm, and part of this rhythm involves the actual land itself having a rest. Now, that doesn't mean that people can't grow things, because the land still naturally grows things. It's not that, oh my gosh, all of a sudden farmers go, oh my, we're all going to starve, right? Where did all the food come from? Well, first of all, animals continue to do what animals do. And what do animals do when humans aren't watching? And sometimes even when they are watching, right? They make other animals, and which is all very, very lovely, which means that you are going to have things to eat and to drink, and they're not going to disappear on us, or we're not all going to starve. And the same goes with trees. The trees will bear fruit, and they will be available to collect. What the Shemitah is wanting, and crops will grow, not as good as perhaps a an abundant harvest if you till the land. But the seeds of wheat, they spread via by the wind, and they're carried by birds, etc., etc. And so there is things to eat. Plus, we remember that we got a double portion the previous year. And so if we were wise and if we weren't greedy, then there will always be enough. So there's this strong connection with the people in the earth, that if people are going to rest, then also the land has to rest. And if you remember from Leviticus 19, that's like the big chapter in the center of the book, which describes what it really means to be holy. Then when God says, be holy because I'm holy, the very next thing he says is honor your parents and honor the Sabbath, right? So the family was very important to holiness, and time is very intrinsic to holiness. And time, and in Judaism, and therefore by default, also the Christian faith, which is just, another stream of Judaism, that time is important, place is important, land is important, and family is important. And so because the land is important just as much as family is important, and so families are resting and time is important, the land, it's all connected. The land itself has to have a break. And it does. It's supposed to. And unfortunately, we will discover that when the children of Israel enter the land of Israel, they do not follow these jubilees and these shmitas. And so one comment by the prophet Jeremiah, when the children of Israel are going into exile, God says, now that you're gone, the land will have its rest, and all the built up missing jubilees and missing shmitas are all going to fall in this time. So it's actually quite important when you look at it. And even in modern farming practice, they'll tell you this is wisdom. Right? Even in a modern farming practice, they have rotation cycles for fields, and then they let fields lie fallow, and that's they don't do it in the same way. So a farmer will not have all his fields fallow at any one time. He might have different periods of time where this paddock or this field is lying fallow, but the one next to it is being farmed, and then we'll change it over the next year. So it is done by non-believers. But this text, interestingly, while talking about land, let's have a look at verse 25. It introduces another concept. It says, if one of your fellow Israelites become poor and sells some of his property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem them what they have sold. Then have a look in verse 35. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and is unable to support themselves among you, help them out as you would a foreigner. Verse 39, if one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor, it's the same phrase, and then sells themselves to you, don't make them work as slaves. So there's some connection between the poor and land. And one of the connections is that they both are low, rabbinically, in a rabbinic mind. What's the connection between land having to rest and then this injunction, don't rob the poor, don't oppress poor people. And the idea is both the land and poor people are low. One's low in terms of socioeconomic status. There's not much more poorer than the poor, and there's nothing much more lower than the earth, right? Okay, they're both down the bottom, but you still have to take care of them, because God's eyes are not always on the high and mighty. And God, Moses slash God through Moses, knows that the children of Israel, even when they go into the land of Israel, are going to suffer economic depravity, right? They're not always going to be an affluent, vibrant, economically powerful society. So he knows that there are going to be those within the community that will become poor. And now we need to know what to do with them. And so as part of taking care of the low earth, you also have to take care of the low people. And so you get these instances where people sell themselves as the indentured servants. We've talked about that in previous Parashah. The Bible does have a form of slavery, but not in the form of slavery that we understand, where you own someone for life. These are people who are working off a debt. And once the debt is cleared, or someone comes and buys them, redeems them, then they're immediately freed, because the nature of man is he is not meant to be enslaved; he's meant to be free. But the Torah doesn't have jails, right? When people come and commit a crime and they're judged. And they're judged by the priests. The priests are part of the judiciary system. Then, because temporal problems are also spiritual problems. So, people are thieves, and that's actually a sin. Okay, so it might be a physical grievance, a transgression against the law, but it's also a spiritual issue. And so the priests are your judiciary. Now, but when the priests give a judgment, then as we read in the Torah, there's no jail time. No one puts anyone in jail. It's all sentences are carried out immediately. And obviously the most frightening ones are the death penalty, where you have to take them out the camp and immediately do something to them. But if I've stolen Doris's new Jeep, because it's a really nice Jeep, and then I get caught and they say, Aaron, you need to pay back the Jeep, plus there's always a little extra that I have to pay back, and I say, but I can't, I've gone and crashed it. Well, but I owe Doris a Jeep, so I have to pay back that. And so, but how do I do it? I start working. I work for her. I'm now her indentured servant, until such time as someone comes and buys me back. That is, a relative might come and say, Aaron, man, you're an idiot, but you're my brother, and so I will pay Doris a new vehicle and the extra bits that she's meant to, and you'll be redeemed. But there's no jail time in the Bible, and so indentured servitude is what we're also seeing here. But God knows that there'll be economic trouble, and we need to take care of poor people. And so they have to have the ability to glean. They need to have the ability to be redeemed. They have to have the ability to work off their debt. And there's an interesting proverb that we can see with poor people in Proverbs 22. Verse 22 and 23, it's told, don't rob the poor, right? Because the Lord will take up their case. So the Lord, not only is the Lord's eyes watching on the land, he's also watching on those who have come into economic difficulty. And it's an interesting phrase of itself. How can you rob the poor? Because they're poor. They've got nothing else to take, right? So what does that actually mean? To rob the poor? And the Hebrew there doesn't actually mean rob. It actually means to seize, like to take, to plunder, like to kidnap, to take hostage. So what the proverb is trying to say is that follow the rules regarding poor people. That if they have to come and work for you to work off a debt or to have some sort of income, which is a good thing, then honor that service. That is, pay them properly. Which means like if I'm now the indentured servant of Doris, Doris says, okay, Aaron, well, looks like you and me are going to be friends now for 7 years as you have to work for me. Here are the tasks that you have to do. And this is how much you'll get paid, but you're not actually getting paid because it's just coming off your debt. But as soon as that debt is clear, brother, you're off. And just keep it honest, as opposed to, Aaron's my slave for life. I'll find all kinds of reasons to keep him in my employ, and that kind of stuff. So, the God acknowledges that there will be economic trouble. He also acknowledges there'll be those that can weather economic trouble, and so when the rich's turn to treat the poor, they will treat them fairly, justly, and kindly. And if not, then the Lord comes to their defense, and which is interesting. And so some of the poorest of the poor in society were the widows and orphans, were those that didn't have male figures that could go and fight for them or go to court for them or to marry them and produce children and care for them and provide, and or parents. And yet parents were intrinsic to holiness, right? That was, be holy. And so the idea of what is true religion was taking care of these people groups. To be really honest, at the heart of God was to take care of the people who had gotten to the very end of the economic strata. Now, this is not to say that the Bible promotes egalitarianism, where we're all meant to be equal. Okay? That's often a strong misreading of the text. The Bible could easily say, there shall be no poor amongst you, so therefore all the rich should give to the poor people their money and we'll all be equal. Okay? But that's not what happens. Okay? What happens is if God blesses you and he blesses you with a house, fantastic. It's great. Bless the Lord. But make sure you're generous with your house and you invite people over and you actually use it and might even have a room for poor people. If you've got a field, it's fantastic. Just grow lots, but also leave the edges for the poor people. And so there's this idea that God can bless you, and we want to all be blessed, but then also make sure that you have the spirit of generosity included. And so it's interesting that the Shemitah, the concept of being of a strong sense of holiness that's connected to the land, is also in this same phrase connected to those that are impoverished, and God wants us to take care of both, and if we're not taking care of the poor, and we are impressing and seizing them and doing something inappropriate, then one of the things we lose is the land. And what's so unfortunate in Israelite history is, even though covenant is tied with land, children of Israel have spent more time out of the land of Israel than in it, which is that's tough, guys. That's because there's, as the people of God, you're thinking, but we should have a place for ourselves, and the answer is yes, absolutely. But please understand, you're a light to the nations, and the covenant that God made with you is attached to land. And so when you break it, unfortunately, there was exile. But as we've all just managed to celebrate Jerusalem Day, that is not the end of the story. And so we're discovering that God has once again remembered his covenant with his people and has brought his people back. And one of our concerns as fellow sons and daughters of Abraham being grafted in is to pray, guys, honor the land in Israel. So this includes the Shemitah, honor the poor. Okay, don't oppress them and rob them, because God will come and defend them, and it's not what you want. Be a light to the nations, and so we need to pray that the Israelis, get their government settled and have get their judiciary system worked out, how they have their checks and balances, and as well as just praying, oh Lord, bless Israel economically. They need also to be a spiritual and holy light to the nations. So we urge them to do that. So the Torah portion is actually a double one, and it's a double one because we're not in a leap year, so we don't have the second month of Adar. So the Torah portion also includes the rest of Leviticus, and it's these a series of rewards and punishments for obedience and for disobedience. Exactly what I was just talking about. Okay, is you get this little summary that says that says essentially, when you come into the land, because it's tied to the land, and you start being obedient, then you'll get these great blessings. But if you don't listen to what I'm saying, if you don't walk in my ways, if you're not acting as a holy people, then there's going to be punishment. And so rewards and punishments, consequences to actions, is a strong biblical theme. You do see it. Obviously, you see it in Hebrew Bible. And sometimes I happen to have heard lovely brothers and sisters who then tell me that once we're into the New Testament, it's just simply grace, and God seems to do a big whitewash of anything that we actually physically do. And that's actually not true, because there are actually many verses in the New Testament that clearly remind us that there are consequences to actions. Paul talks about it in Galatians when he says, you reap what you sow. And he's not the only one who says that. The same theme that we find in Hebrew Bible, we're going to find in Greek Bible, or what we call Old Testament and New Testament. So the phrase that the Leviticus will use, it'll say, if you follow these commands. What does it mean to follow a command? The word there is to walk, and walking is an action. It's where we get the word halakha, which is right conduct and right behavior. And so the Hebrew Bible is concerned about halakha, how you walk out your faith. We call those things obedience or disobedience or following the law, but it's actually just walking it out, putting it into practice, actually doing what God says. And then, where do you find this in the New Testament? I hear you ask. Gee, that's a really good question. Well, it's right there in Colossians. There you go. There's Paul for you, the man of grace and all that freedom. He says in Colossians, walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Chapter 1, right? Walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Not think in a manner worthy of the Lord. Not believe in a manner worthy of the Lord. But in very Jewish ways, he's talking to a group in Colossians who are a mix of Jews and Gentiles. And he's saying, listen, if you've heard the faith from Epaphras, that was the guy who brought them the gospel. So not only to believe it, not only seek knowledge, not only gain wisdom, and that's what he talks about, knowledge, wisdom, spiritual understanding. To do what? Have had a good Bible study? No. but to actually put it into practice and actually know that when we all get up from our table, we actually have the right conduct and such. Now, interestingly, this is where we get into a little bit of literary criticism. Has anybody heard of this phrase, literary criticism? It's where you have a look at the text and you say, things don't seem to be in the right place. Verse 20, at the end of chapter 26, it says, "These are the decrees, the laws, the regulations that the Lord established at Mount Sinai between himself and the Israelites through Moses." That actually reads like it should have been the end. And then there's this whole other chapter, and it just and you go, what is this? What is chapter 27 about? It seems that it's been tacked on. Okay, is that they thought, we haven't quite finished. We've still got a little bit more to say, or something happened later on in life, and they decided to add a bit. That's one sort of academic little argument. But what chapter 27 actually spends most of its time dealing with is how you pay for everything. And I know that sounds a really strange thing to say, but chapter 27 is all about how you fund the religion. Okay. Now, I know that when we would go to the tabernacle or to the temple and we would bring our offering or our sacrifice, that the priest would get a bit. And that would be his portion. But that's just food. How does he pay for new furniture? How does he pay for new clothing? How does he pay the mohel to come and circumcise his son? And so chapter 27 is all about how you pay for the upkeep of the tabernacle, who pays what, how much they're worth, how much they're going to have to share and put in. And so we discover that paying for things is a perfectly biblical system, and so much so that you also see it in the New Testament. Of course you do, because it is the same theme. And so what does Paul argue? He said, you should have been paying for me. Because I'm doing it for free, but that wasn't the way it's meant to happen. And because he didn't want to be a burden on them, but he had the complete right to say, you need to pay. Now, where did he get that idea from? Okay. You're getting it from here in the Torah, that you actually have to provide for the temple service, the sacrificial service, and all that. And so there was all these laws about what gets offered to the temple, what gets donated to the temple, how much has to get donated to the temple per person. And so there were even rules for the rich. So we've had rules for the poor, right? This is how you're supposed to take care of them. And then there were rules for the rich. And what were the rules for the rich? This is how you give, right? Just because you're rich, you didn't escape your little share of your duty to the tabernacle. So it does appear that if without chapter 27, Leviticus 26 would have been an absolute fair ending, but we do have this extra set of rules, which is taking care of the system and making sure that it's well funded. And it did have funding. And the temple, both the temple had it and tabernacle had storehouses for treasures. So it wasn't just simply that priests would come to work and take home some animal skins. They also had the opportunity to get paid. This, unfortunately, because of human nature, also gets it a chance to be set up for corruption, which unfortunately we see both in the tabernacle and in the temple. And in the tabernacle, it was most highlighted by the sons of Eli, who were not always 100% sure exactly what their sin was, but they seemed to be skimming stuff on the top. And then in the temple, where the money changers and the temple treasury was not doing its job. What is the temple meant to do with all this wealth? Okay, it's meant to take care of widows and orphans. Okay, that's one of their traditions as well. Not just to pay for the priests, yes, to pay for the priests as well, but also and for the high priest and all of those people. But you ended up by this stage, the priests were paying themselves a little too much, and more than they probably should. If anyone's actually been to Israel, I think most of you have, then one of the things you can do is a tour of what they called the Herodian estates. These were actually priestly homes, and we discovered that, boy, were these priests rich. And you think, how did that happen? It happened because the gifts and monies and things that have been given to the temple, of what you find here in Leviticus 27, they were using inappropriately, even though there were clear warnings in the previous chapter to make sure that they didn't oppress, take, seize, rob the poor. They did, which is very unfortunate. And unfortunately, it can still go into the modern world, where instead of having churches that take their money and use their budgets appropriately, we too often we find that some communities use their money inappropriately and demand so much money from their congregations, and instead of using it for the spread of the kingdom, they'll buy a plane and horrible things like that, which is nothing new under the sun, the wise man once said. But these rules are here to help us reflect a holy life, and that holy life is not just simply humans being holy, it's the land being holy, by time being holy, families and societies being holy, and that reflecting the actual character of God. So probably a pretty good chapter to have tacked on there in Leviticus. So that brings us to the new book that the Parashah starts, which people are reading this week, called Midbar. And we know it as the book of Numbers, thanks to the Septuagint, because that's the name it gave, where we just followed suit, because the first chapter deals with a whole bunch of numbers. And yeah, no problem on the timing. It's great to have you here, guys. It's great. In Hebrew, Midbar is the word for desert. So now we actually have a little bit more narrative in the Torah portion, and then we do rules. Although there's going to be a whole bunch of oral traditions that will now start developing, because we've had all the literal pronouncements in Exodus and Leviticus. Now we start living it out, and along the way we're going to see issues that pop up that were not explained explicitly on Mount Sinai, so we have to deal with them, and so we need to create an oral tradition or some sort of tradition to deal with them. Just as a example, female inheritance is not explicitly mentioned in Leviticus or Exodus. Was it an oversight by Moses, I hear you ask, or did God forget the poor women? No, he's been talking about women all the time. right? But there are some things that were not covered. It doesn't cover absolutely everything down to a detail. So then we end up at the end of the book of Numbers, we're going to end up with a lovely young man who's got 5 absolutely beautiful girls, but no boys. And what inherits? He's going to ask Moses, what do I do? And Moses is going to say, I don't know. And so he's actually going to have to turn around and talk to God. How does he do it? Not 100% sure whether he goes and contacts the Urim and Thummim, the breastplate, or whether he actually continues to have divine talking. The text implies and that he actually just talked directly to God. But we're going to create some new traditions, and so Numbers is also a great text for that kind of stuff. But for those that have obviously heard me before in this, the desert is now where we're about to send the people of Israel, and the desert's an amazing place, because the word in Hebrew midbar for desert is also the exact same word for to speak. So midbar, there's no vowels in Hebrew, so the word midbar and the word medaber, they look exactly the same on the pages of the Bible. And it's often in the desert, it's often in the dry places, it's often in the places that are the most dangerous and what's seemingly most insecure, that actually people talk to God the most, or God talks to them the most. Sometimes there's that prayer in the Lord's Prayer, Lord, please don't take me through a time of trial, right? And you could almost hear God saying, but that's the only time you guys ever talk to me, Yeah, you only ever talk to me when things are going wrong. It's very rare when he talks to me when things are going right. So sometimes we have to understand that desert places are actually sometimes very positive for us. So the desert, and it starts, and we start by doing counting, which of course we're not supposed to do, but they actually do. And it's one of those interesting tensions in the text. God says, don't number the people, and then 5 times in the Torah they actually do number the people, and this is one of them. And so they take a census, and you get these long lists, and sometimes people think, I don't quite understand the problem with what we're supposed to be learning. So we need to look for those sentences in the text or information in the text that will tell us something about the heart of God. For example, in the previous Torah portion, Leviticus 26, if you read Leviticus 26 verse 20, where we're talking about rewards and punishments and doing right and doing wrong. And then in Leviticus 40, verse 40, it will say, but if you confess your sin and the sins of your ancestors and their unfaithfulness and their hostility towards me, then I will remember my covenant. And so if you've been disobedient, then Leviticus says an interesting sentence. It says, confess. It doesn't say, bring me a sacrifice. If you bring me a sacrifice, then I'll remember my covenant. If you start giving me lots of blood of bulls and goats, then I shall remember the sacrifice. It's always been about the heart. So you look, when you find lots of lists of laws, lots of lists of commandments, lots of lists of numbers, then look for the little gem that actually reveals the heart of God, and that's one of them. Is that when we know when we've blown it, confession is very, very important. In fact, what does the Epistle of James say? Confess your sins one to another. Right? Confession, you find out, is right here in the Torah, and it flows right through into the New Testament. Now, that does not mean that when we went to the temple, there were little confessional boxes off to the side in the temple that we might find in some of our churches these days. But the actual idea of actually pouring your heart out to God verbally through a confession, or to a brother, because that's what James says, confess your sins one to another, right? Not just to the Lord, okay, but actually to each other. Sometimes it's actually important to offload your heart to God through your brother, right? Because we ask our brothers and sisters to pray for us, don't we? Right? We're asking God to work through our neighbors and our community, not just, Lord, please help me. No need to have any of my brothers and sisters pray for me. God will just do it. No, there is something about community, companionship, and allowing the Lord to work through each other, which is exactly the way he has been operating ever since the beginning. God created the world. He has dominion. He then turns around and says, humans, you have dominion. He could share the gospel. Humans, you share the gospel. He could take care of the poor. Humans, you take care of the poor. He could take care of the land. Humans, you take care of the land. There's this idea of partnership, and it's all actually quite interrelated. But so here we are in the book of Numbers, and we're taking a census, something that we think that perhaps we're not meant to do. So what do we notice about these tribes? They're not the same size. And okay, it's not the same size. Fair enough. Why would everybody have exactly the same number of kids? I get it. Yep, absolutely. And perhaps we may have thought that some of them might have been a bit bigger than others, but we discover that they're not always the biggest. And then when we come into the land of Israel, for those that went to Shiloh, and I know most of you did with me, you would have seen something that's very close to this, okay? Map of the tribes of Israel. This is the territorial allotment that we're about to encounter. And what do we notice about this? Every time I ask people, what do you see? And they always say to me, well, I see colors. Yes, I know that. But we see that Manasseh has a huge piece of territory. And poor old little Issachar, a little red dot just below the Galilee, you know, a tiny little thing. And you go, okay. But if we have a look, Issachar's territory, this is now verse 28. From the descendants of Issachar. Issachar is a fantastic name, by the way. If I had had another son, I would have called him Issachar, because it means Yesh Sachar, there is a reward. And I think that's a really beautiful prophetic name to say there is a reward. It's eternal. It's wonderful. Just hang on. So these from the descendants of Issachar, all the men 20 years old. Oh, that's right. We're counting only men who are 20. That doesn't mean that people who are 19 weren't valuable, or anybody. They are incredibly valuable, especially children. You know, fantastic. But we're talking about military-aged folk. Probably because why are we having to count military? Because eventually that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to know how many people to make weapons for, and how many commanders to get, and how many units to make. Because I know that when we invade Canaan, the first battle is the Lord's. Absolutely, right? He lowers the water down and we can cross the Jordan, and then we go and attack Jericho. Although the first thing we do when we get into the land of Canaan, does anyone know what we do when we first get into the land of Canaan? We circumcise ourselves. And you think, now, why would we have to do that? Surely we would have been circumcised in the desert, because we've been carrying around the Torah for 40 years. But somewhere along the line, some of these priests were not doing their job and not teaching the people properly, which always surprises me that this is not the best military strategy when you're invading a country, to immediately incapacitate yourself. Okay. I mean, the Russians are doing a great job in Ukraine, but Israel wasn't. I don't know. That was the best battle plan when they walked into Canaan. But God fights at Jericho, and the walls come down, and it's a great story. And then that doesn't happen for any other city in Canaan. You have to participate, right? God's gonna give you the land. Excellent. You have to go fight. You have to participate. You have to be a part of it. We often ask the Lord, please, Lord, give us the harvest of souls. We would love to see our churches filled. And God's going, yes, I want to see our churches filled too. So get out there, right? Lord, send your spirit to woo people into the church. And he's like, yes, I will, in you. Now get out there. And there's this strong element of us participating in the call, the holiness, the whole plan of God. So Issachar, numbering everybody who's 20 and above, and according to their number, the number of the tribe of Issachar was 54,400. And then we go down and have a look at Manasseh in verse 34. From the descendants of Manasseh, all the men 20 years old or more who were able to serve in the army, according to the records of clans and families, the number of the tribe was 32,200. So we discover that Manasseh is actually smaller. Has got a massive number of territory. I mean, once again, just have a look. He gets so much land, and Issachar does not, or Zebulun gets not. So we learned something. What are we learning from this? For those that were at Shiloh, you might remember we learn that not everybody gets the same, and that's okay. Right? This idea that we all have to be exactly the same is actually not a biblical principle. In fact, God loves diversity. That's why we're diverse. And the community is they're just different sizes. They're blessed in different ways. They've got different amounts of kids, and so we number all these people, and they're preparing themselves for military age and service. Okay, this is it's very important for nations to do this, unfortunately, to have themselves an army. So guess who has the largest army per capita on the planet? Anyone know? You'll be very surprised. It's the Vatican. The Vatican City's only got 4,000 people in terms of its entire population. Okay, smallest country in the world, and it's got 100 Swiss guards. So therefore, by comparison, they got quite a large army. But anyway, the children of Israel have to get their little army together and number all their people, and then, I mean, imagine how they're thinking. They've just seen God do all these amazing miracles. They have to go out and fight against Amalek soon. Okay, they're going to have to go and battle the people who have to invade Canaan. Were they scared? Yeah, most likely. Were some of them excited? Yeah, probably. There's all kinds of different people. There's feelings when it comes to this. But did they do their duty? Well, yes, they did. Okay, and they were all meant to fight as a cohesive group, but still within their tribal allotments. They weren't to try and pretend to be from somebody else's tribe. So they ended up with banners and sigils, which is an interesting thing. And where they get all their images from, I'm not 100% sure. Some are obvious. So Benjamin, his sigil, his banner, his flag is a wolf, and it comes from the blessing that Jacob gives Benjamin, where he says Benjamin is like a young wolf. So, but Zebulon, if people wanted to see, Zebulon is this little purple dude. Okay, he's there, and he's nowhere near water, but his sigil's a boat. Now I have no idea where they got that idea from. I sometimes wonder if it was just, wishful thinking, that we'll all rally around a boat. We haven't got any lakes or anything. No, but one day, maybe. Okay. We'll just, maybe there was a little bit of hope there. I don't know where a lot of these images or things come. Judah's obviously a lion. Again, that does actually have a reference to a blessing, but some of the other guys don't have that. Levi is an interesting guy, because the tribe of Levites are actually used in a redemptive way, where they themselves redeem people. Humans redeeming humans. Well, where have we heard that before? Okay, it's sort of appears here. There are instructions as to what this. Yes, we got a hand raised. Okay, are we allowed to take hands, or do I chat and then we'll do it in the end? Yeah, okay, we'll do it at the end. Okay, so we have to understand that the Torah that we're talking about is given in the wilderness. So one of the names of the text are Bamidbar, in the desert. So the Torah is not given to Israel in the land of Israel. Okay, and so why has that got any significance or meaning? And it has in some Jewish commentaries. They will say, why does God have to speak from Mount Sinai? Why does the text say the Lord spoke to Israel from Mount Sinai? Why does one of our books say in the desert? Now take a census. Why aren't we doing this when we're actually in Israel? And it's to say that the Torah doesn't belong in the land of Israel. What I mean by that, it doesn't belong to Israel. It's not to be bound by a geographical region. It's meant to be shared to the world. It's meant to be given out. Anyone is allowed to come and take the Torah. It's not to be forbidden. Now, people do forbid Gentiles from trying to take the Torah. They do it in today, but they're not supposed to. Okay, it was meant to be a gift to the nations. In fact, Moses is going to say in Deuteronomy, no other nation has a Torah like you. No other nation has such wisdom and understanding and vibrancy in their laws, in the way they're supposed to deal with the poor, with the land, with their worship cycle, with their prayer life, being able to fund their ministries, which is what we saw at the end of Leviticus. The Torah is given outside the land of Israel. It'll apply to the land of Israel, yes, but it's to teach Israel that it's not a closed book. It's not a closed society. It's meant to actually be shared and given to all the world. So in terms of sitting around and numbering the people, then even though we're told that we're not supposed to do this, they do. And numbering people has two aspects to it. One, it's telling us that each individual person is worthy and significant because you got counted, right? It was counted, you got counted. They didn't ask, do you have a master's degree? How good's your farming skill? Can you do 20 push-ups? And then we'll count you. Everybody got counted. So everyone who was above 20 was worthy and significant. And but it's also a great equalizer, because it made everybody, you're as valuable as that person. 1-1. So even though I said about 15-20 minutes ago that there's no egalitarianism in the Bible, it does count everybody as having the same value: rich and poor, slave and free, male and female. But it's not, that doesn't mean that we race ourselves to to socialism, but everyone is worthy and significant as an individual, and everyone is put as a great equalizer, that you're all part of a tribe, you're part of something that's bigger. There's a description as to how the camp is to be laid out. It's quite specific as to which tribes sit where, and they will surround the tabernacle. The tabernacle is going to be in the center, and it's going to be the central part of the life of the Jewish people. And depending on the size of the camp will dictate that people perhaps won't have access to the tabernacle as much or as often as we think. Because when you count up all these numbers, does anyone see how much the count is? The count is in the first chapter, the number of men, 600 and 603,550, and that's just the men, right? And here's does anyone think of the problem that number raises? It then says, why are you going to have any trouble invading Canaan with an army of that size? Israel doesn't have that size army right now. Okay? The actual size of Israel's army right now is about 180,000. Okay, and you go, how is that number possible? And so here's the issue. The word Eleph does mean thousands, but it can also mean units. So it might be that we've read the numbers a little too high, that the actual, you got to take a few zeros off. But I will leave that up for the discussion a bit later if people want to talk about it. But there is scholarship both in the Jewish and in Gentile world where they argue and debate the meaning of the word Eleph, okay, which is the number for 1,000, and does it actually refer to 1,000 people, or is it referring to a unit, which could be as much as 100 people, like a company, an army company, in which case you're going to have to knock a couple of zeros off, which then makes the invasion of Canaan perhaps make a little bit more sense. So depending on, and then would also dictate, because if there were 3 million people running around the desert, how do 3 million people get into the tabernacle? They can't. It's just not physically possible. In fact, based on those numbers, most people would not get to the tabernacle ever, right? And so it's the numbers are fun things in the Bible, particularly when there's a whole book called Numbers, which is the one where we're just describing right now. But aside from the numbers, and we'll talk about that in 10-15 minutes or so, there is the idea of, in the center of our community will be God, will be our worship system, will be the presence of the Lord. We'll be able to see it because there's going to be this pillar of cloud. We might not always be able to hear the prayers. We might not always be able to see what's going on because there's curtains and things around, but we will acknowledge that in the midst of our community is the living God. And so while he protects us, we are at the same time protecting him, right? We're the outer rim of protection, but he is actually our protection. So there's that partnership idea again, and we have to take it down and move it. So then the Bible, the book of Numbers gives us a particular tribal group. It's going to be from the tribe of Levi. It's going to be a particularly family group, the Kohathites, whom we discover are actually the sons of Korah. And so Levites will break down and carry the ark and carry the tabernacle. So Here's an interesting question. So we are only allowed to go into the Holy of Holies once a year. So how do we break down the Holy of Holies then? Right? So suddenly did we discover we can only go into the Holy of Holies once a year, except of course when we move the thing, okay? And then actually we do go into the Holy of Holies. And so there is a rule, absolutely, but then there's also the practicality of working that out, and so they broke down. Apparently, they moved the tent about 17 times. I think I once saw a chart where they showed where they would move and set it up, which means that 17 times somebody had to go into the Holy of Holies and physically move stuff, okay? And it wasn't on Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur, you didn't do that. On Yom Kippur, you did nothing, right? That was a day you stopped and did nothing, and you just engaged in prayer, fasting, and the sacrificial system. So there's also a description of the children of Aaron, but Moses' sons aren't listed. Now, why would they not be listed? One reason is, and it's an interesting commentary when I read it, is they said that because Moses' children didn't actually experience the Exodus. And I had completely forgotten that. So, because Moses had actually, when he was on his way to Pharaoh for the very first time, took his family to Egypt on a donkey, right, in Exodus 6, right? Now that's very, very reminiscent of the family of Jesus in Matthew, right, fleeing Herod and going down to Egypt. So, but Moses didn't allow his wife and children to stay in Egypt. They actually went back. He sent them out, and then so they didn't experience the Exodus. They didn't see all the plagues. They didn't go through the Red Sea. It's only when they come to Mount Sinai that in Exodus chapter 18, Jethro brings Moses's wife and kids. Right, so they hadn't actually seen any of this, and which may explain why Moses's children don't do so well. They end up, according to the Book of Judges, going into idolatry. But it's Aaron's kids that are actually going to be given lists down here. Okay. So the text is often going to say Moses and Aaron and his sons. It's never going to say Moses and his sons and Aaron and his children. There is the priestly line, or the Levitical line, is going to take its role through Aaron, and so Aaron is going to be the priestly portion, and Moses is going to take the prophetic portion. And you need both of these offices. You need to have the prophetic role, which gives you the power of the future, that gives you the emphasis on the Spirit, on hearing from God, of making prophetic proclamation. But you also need the grounding of the priests. At the same time, you need to have someone who has a base, who keeps the base and says, no, we're in a cycle, we're in a rhythm, we have a calendar, and it goes like this. 1 month follows 1 month. There's no jumping around. You engage in holy time. You take care of the land. These are the rules for dealing with people. So you have this something solid, which is your priestly thing. And then you have the prophetic, which is the sort of more freer and dynamic way, but you need both. So, and I think the way that God actually is setting up the people of Israel is a great reflection for the church. You know, you have to have something solid. And oh yes, we have Jesus; He's our solid rock. Okay, well, what does that mean? That's just an esoteric sentence. Okay, you actually have a system of rules, and you know that on Sunday or whatever day of worship you come, and it is at this time, okay, in this place, on this day, every week. Okay, it's not that that you wake up in the morning and think, oh, we'll go to church on a Monday, and next week we'll do it on Tuesday afternoon at 6. It's that you get into a rhythm and a cycle, and you need it. The church needs to have that prophetic voice and the ability to just hear from God and go off and do something amazing. But it also, at the same time, it needs to have that grounding, something that's solid, and especially that rhythm of prayer that grows with having a calendar and stuff. And so these sort of things are beginning to appear in the Torah. And as well as numbering a bunch of soldiers, we also number a bunch of priests, because we have to make sure that we've got all these guys covered as well, because they're just as valuable and important, and particularly in the concept of figuring out who can and who cannot engage in redemptive activity. Okay, in buying back and redeeming people, which is done through priests. Right? You actually, anyone can do it, of course, but it's going to be done through priests, and the actual Levites themselves, the actual humans. Okay, in chapter 3, humans redeem humans. It'll say in verse 40, the Lord says to Moses, count all the firstborn Israelite males who are a month old or more, and make a list of their names. Take the Levites for me in place of all the firstborn. Right? Human for human. That's fantastic. But it's priests who do it. Okay, it's a priestly caste, Levite. It's not Judah. Okay, we can't quickly always race to messianic thoughts, but at least the idea, the inyan, is there of humans being able to redeem other people. And for God here in the desert, those people who were doing that were the priestly tribe, were those that were closest to him in his tabernacle, and making sure that not only were his people being kept holy, but the very ground, the tabernacle, the very structure and fabric of everything was also holy. Let's remember on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is always in the plural. Okay, it's the Day of Atonements, and the first thing you atone for is the sacred place. Right? You before we do all the people and send a scapegoat out, you make sure that you atone for the priest, his clothing, the altar, the menorah, the curtains. I mean, even the ground is getting atoned for. And once that's all done, then you can move on to the actual goats themselves and do something else. So there's a lot there, always a lot there in the Torah portion. Hoping that you're also learning stuff. I've picked up a few things myself this Torah portion, which was good, and a few things that just reminded me of how serious sometimes God takes the army. Okay, where we actually have to work out who our fighting soldiers are. That's obviously very applicable for me because I've got one in the army, and and he seems to be the right age biblically for it all. 21, doing his job. But yep, there you go. All right, guys, let's open it up for questions. Let's have a discussion on our text, see what we can wrestle with.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
Aaron, can you hear me?
Can.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is towards the beginning of your teaching there. I just, it's more of a comment than a question, and it was talking about the land taking a rest. the land will always produce, like what you were saying, just even during the Shemitah year, the animals are still multiplying and isn't it interesting that there's a massive fear of exactly against that there's not enough. There's not a lot, and there's a whole push of like we're overpopulated and yet here it is very much in the Torah is it's just reaffirming that constantly. The land just needs to be treated properly, and then there's plenty. There's plenty. In fact, it says in I can't remember where it was at the end of Leviticus where the grapes will be producing while you're planting, the next crop, and they actually overlap, and just the abundance of the land. And so I just thought, there's so many initiatives going on in our world today that are exactly opposite of what the promises are literally saying in the Word of God. And so I'm always thankful for the Word of God, just because it actually reaffirms that we're not quarreling with this. We know a promise of this. We know a covenant of this. And so, always believing.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, Gavin, because that is, I think a lot of us encounter the false narrative that we see in the world, the fear that people have of not having enough, and we have so much. The fear of not being able to step out because we think we won't have, that God won't provide. Yet he provides even during the Shemitah year, even in the times where you're not meant to be doing something. And the land itself is so precious that it has to be treated in the same spiritual way as a human, and it also needs to rest. But the land's not going to stop producing. It will. And but our world, our culture is just so antithetical to the message of the Bible, and we've got it. And in our fear, we have no idea the trouble that's coming. Okay, we really don't. We'll all start seeing it in the next 10 years. Once the bell curve of human population has peaked and it just drops off, and it'll be a real shock for a lot of people. Does anyone know how much of the earth we're actually living on? Has anyone ever known the statistic? It's about 9-point-something%. That's fun. It's like the other 90% of the earth is empty. Isn't that sad? And you obviously know this in Canada.
Yeah.
Okay.
In Saskatchewan,
Okay.
there's something like 1.2 square kilometers per person.
Yeah, I know. It's like, yeah.
It and so when you come against that narrative of there's not enough, it's you can drive forever. And yeah.
And interestingly, yesterday Melody sent me a picture of where we were with a group. We were in Benjamin, and we were looking and praying. We're always praying for anyone who wanted to know. Every picture, someone's got their hands up doing something. And we were praying over the hill tribe of Benjamin, hill territory of Benjamin, and looking at a settlement called Alon. And Melody asked, "What was it that you said there?" And I said, "Well, I would have been talking about this, because I always talk to people when I go there. I say, look at territory of Benjamin. Benjamin was a very small tribe, and he just couldn't he couldn't flourish as some of his other fellow tribal members. So his territory only had 2 or 3 cities in his entire tribal allotment. And so the vast majority of the territory of Benjamin was empty. And here's this land, and archaeologically, there is no archaeology in the territory that we were looking at, which means if you do the whole evolutionary thing, which I don't, but then there's no Chalcolithic, no Neolithic, no early Bronze Age, no late Bronze Age, no Iron Age. There's nothing. No one has lived on those hills ever. And so we were looking at a Jewish settlement, and we could say this is the first time any human has been on that hill. You know, and it's reflective of the promise of God, of the fact that He's remembered His covenant. In fact, the end of Leviticus, where it's talking about disobedience and obedience, He says, when you confess, I'll remember my covenant. Right? You know, God makes a statement that when you actually with your lips confess, trust me, on my side of the table, I'll remember my covenant and I'll start putting it into practice. And you can see that he's doing these things. But yeah, it's an empty planet. It's not a full planet, and it's not a planet that runs out of food. We're always growing more, so we shouldn't be scared. Should just shouldn't have any fear. The Torah is a book of love, and perfect love cancels out fear. So
I just had a question going back to I actually have 2 questions, but going back to the numbering the tribes, and there are 12
Yep.
of them. And then when you get into chapter 2 of Bamidbar, so Ephraim is not mentioned in the first list, but Ephraim is listed as going out to war, and the numbering there. And when we look at the 12 tribes, we often don't have Ephraim listed. So I know they were both Joseph's sons, right? Ephraim and...
So Joseph doesn't get a territorial allotment. Ephraim and Manasseh do. Yes, it's a very intriguing thing. Why is Joseph numbered? Well, actually, he's numbered through the descendants of Ephraim. He gets from the sons of Joseph, you get Ephraim and Manasseh, and they all each get their little numbers. In Ephraim, that's where God sets up Shiloh.
Yeah, Shiloh. Exactly.
And what's in Shiloh? That's the tabernacle. That's the presence of the Lord for 369 years. And then in Jerusalem, which eventually gets given over to Judah's territory, it oscillates between Benjamin and Judah, but eventually it sits in Judah's territory because Benjamin nearly gets wiped out, and he's just very small, and there's no way he can sustain the city. So eventually it falls under Judah's jurisdiction, and that's also where you get the temple and the presence of God. And so Ephraim and Judah are your 2 tribes where the presence of God lived. And so when you start talking prophetically about that, it's always Ephraim and Judah are the 2 sticks that join together. And some people have run away inappropriately, I think, where they'll say, we are descendants of we're Ephraimites. You go, oh, for crying out loud, no, you're not. You grafted in, dude. It's awesome. You don't have to pick a tribe if you want to, but you don't have to be Ephraim. I think prophetically you're looking at the 2 tribes, the 2 centers where God lived, and that actually speaks a lot more boldly than trying to figure out why we're dropping off any of the other tribes. When we go into lists of tribes, we end up with the same problem with disciples. Every time they the list of 12 disciples, always different numbers, and here we have different names, and sometimes like Dan would get missed in one, and particularly in Revelation, and you think, well, he obviously set up idolatry, but in Ezekiel, Dan is there, right? And so you end up with all of Israel will be there, and that includes the descendants of Dan. They're not all evil.
Thank you. The other question was, I don't know if you want to go into it now. I'm just kind of curious about what you mean about the bell curve and how it's 10 years will be a drop off. Is that
okay?
What are you looking at here?
Yep. So there was a book written, actually the book is called Empty Planet, and it's written by two Canadians, by the way, okay, who are not Christians. They're not believers. They've got no axe to grind. And what they did is they went country by country, so every country, and they looked at the fertility rate and demographics, and they said this is what's going to happen in 10 years. Okay. And so, for example, in Korea, South Korea, which currently has a population of 42 million people, but in 20 years' time will have a population of 22 million people. And you go, what? So last year, 11 countries, their population dropped. So, for example, in Japan, that was 1 million people, and in Russia, it was 1 million people. And so you think, well, what's the problem with that? Okay, well, it goes like this. Imagine your street, and imagine in 20 years' time, only half the people living on it. You say, well, what's the problem with that? Well, if you have a house and there's no one in it, what happens? The earth takes over.
Sure.
Yeah, it really does. The earth just takes over. And so people are building houses in Japan. Why? Every year we build more houses, but every year there's less people. Who's living in them? China just had a housing market crash because they discovered that they've actually got 2 houses for every human. Why build more houses? Who is living in them? They're not having any kids. And so suddenly realize that everything's worthless. And that's actually going to be something that we in the believing community, we're going to have to face. Because a lot of people get very scared. They won't understand what happened when suddenly there's no tax base. You're going to have nobody working and nobody earning, so no one's going to be able to produce a tax. So who's going to pay for your roads? Who's going to pay for your port? Who's going to pay for your airplane? And everything changes, and it looks very it can look scary for some people. We don't have to panic but everything changes. So if you live in a village of 10,000 people and you have a coffee shop, 5 years from now, you're going to have living in a village of 6,000 people. How much coffee you're selling? A lot less. Okay, so how are you going to pay for your big screen TV? And everything changes. And people don't quite understand. They think that the world just continues on as it is. But there are some countries that have maintained stable populations through importing people. The most famous one, of course, is America. And how are they importing people? Well, they're just walking across the border. People walking in, filling up their country. They've got lots of people. Israel's still got quite a high birth rate. I read a very interesting article a week ago. Japan did a study on salt consumption in China. Why would you do such a thing? Okay, well, I'm not Japanese, so I don't know why they're fixated with working out how much salt Chinese people eat. But they here's what their study says. They said, based on the salt consumption, because everybody eats salt. Everyone. If you don't have salt in your diet, you'll die. Okay, it's in your food, it's in fertilizer, it's in the ground, you have salt. Okay, it's one of those substances of earth you have to have. So everybody has it. And they did a census, and they said, actually, based on everybody in China eats 11 grams of salt per day, or whatever is the figure, a week or month or something. So based on that, do you know what their real population is? 980 million. They're not 1.4 billion. It's a giant lie. And it's an interesting study. And then another lady came along and said, well, actually, let's have a look at the economic output. Let's have a look at a satellite photo and see how many people actually turn their lights on at night. And then based on that, let's do a count. Same figure, 980 million. You know, the Chinese have been lying about their numbers and for years, and now it's all catching up to them because their one-child policy is a disaster. It's ungodly, and God's having his you reaping what you sow. And so they are, again, within 10 years, everybody who's 60 is now 70, everybody who's 70 is now 80, everybody who's 80 is now not here. Okay. Some of them going to live to 120. That's true, but it's a very, very small percentage. And so what you do is you have these population curves, and it just drops, and it's a massive, massive drop. And for those of us, most of us here will actually see that. Some of us maybe not, but we'll see a world really struggling in every way. And the church, the people of God, need to come to the party to say, I know you're afraid, everything's gone crazy, but we need to give hope, we need to give light, we need to say this is how you're supposed to actually live. You know, we celebrate children, you know, we want to have as many as possible. So, alrighty. But that's it's an interesting study.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to play out for mission societies because all their funding will dry up. No, I'm serious. Okay, so in my little world, okay, two of my supporters stopped giving. Do you know why they stopped giving? They died. They did not ask me permission to do that. Okay, I was very, very disappointed. Okay, because I would not have given them permission. But yeah. And, you know, you get an interesting email saying, I'm really sorry, but my mother's passed away, so we're going to stop the regular giving. So, okay, I get it. Yeah, happens.
Yeah. I just wanted to go back to Leviticus 26, what you were talking about. Leviticus
You mean
26.
the confession bit?
Yeah, 26:40. It's interesting how it says there, then when their uncircumcised hearts are humbled and they pay for their sin, you know, and what does that mean to pay for their sin? Was that because God said they were going to exile them? Is that how they paid for their sin? You know, because then you always have this, you know, in other denominations where you actually pay through doing something, saying prayers or whatever, that becomes how you pay and how you humble yourself.
That's excellent. So let's remember that the basis of exegetical tradition in Hebrew is to go literal and then go into the more exegetical traditions, and then even get into the mysticism, which is the sod, the mystery. So the actual literal is a confession word, and you see it in Hosea. I think it's chapter 4, where it says, what shall I bring to the Lord? I'll bring a word, right? Of a lip, right? But So that's one thing. So the literal thing is you have to circumcise your heart. You have to confess from your heart. And once the heart's done, good, we're all home and hose. But then, of course, what's the next thing? Now that you actually know you've done something wrong, so you'll actually have to physically come and offer. There might be a payment. That is, there actually might be a sacrifice. There could be animal grain. There might be a vow. You might have to go and do a vow. We come before the Lord and say, Lord, I'm not going to do it again. And I vow that if I do this again, the priest can come and take my house, or whatever is the vow that we go into. Or it could be that you get the more mystical side is that actually you did pay for it. How did you pay for it? Because you was exiled, right? Is that it's only finally when you were out of the land and things were not so good that you turned around and actually humbled yourself, and God said, yes, I accept it. I accept the heart, I accept the confession, and I accept the fact that your payment's been done by exile or some sort of trial or something. So there's those levels too. But whatever we say must never go against the pshat, which is it's a confession of sins and the sins of their ancestors, right? It's the acknowledgement that we're part of a story, we're part of a people, we're part of a story, and we acknowledge that sin is contagious and it follows us, right? The sins of the fathers, etc., etc. And the opposite is true too. The blessings of the fathers will also follow. That's just as good. Job was always sacrificing for the sins of his sons, right? He's not for himself. And you're like, wow, this guy's incredible, right? We should be praying for our kids all the time, right? Yep. And so especially for our wayward children, that's definitely the ones we should be interceding the Lord for. And then they become clean from their heart. So we can go to anything else, and you're allowed to, but we must always go back to the initial one to say that. But at the end of the day, it's still the heart, because it always was about the heart, wasn't it? Write these laws on your heart, circumcise your heart, give me clean hearts, etc. And here it is again in Leviticus, which I always find just fantastic. Make your confession. Still, that will not stop. Nowhere does that stop temple service. Nowhere does that stop priests being priests or people coming and offering things to the Lord, because as we've discussed, sacrifices are ways of drawing close to God. Just as an aside, we had this really very interesting Bible study. Can't remember who it was with anymore. Because I swear new verses appear in my Bible. Does that happen to you? Where you read the text and you go, I have not seen that before. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was reading because I was being challenged, and so when given a challenge, Aaron accepts challenge, goes and sits and reads. It said it's Hebrews 9:22. Without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. Okay, and yet in Hebrews 10:4, it says, but the blood of animals could never take away sin. So that is a rather superfluous sentence for your previous sentence, which says, without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin, but shedding of blood doesn't take away sin anyway. So then I actually read the full sentence. And has anyone got Hebrews 9:22 on them? It's an interesting thing to do. I've been meaning to try and figure out how to do a teaching on this without getting myself into lots of trouble.
Is this the one that it says, in fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness?
Yep. So read that again really slowly. And what's the word that shouldn't be there but is there?
So in fact, the law requires that nearly everything
That's it.
be
Thank you.
cleansed with blood. And
The
with,
law requires that some translations will say almost
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
So hang on. So what doesn't require blood?
yeah, yeah.
Right? And suddenly you go, "Hey, what are you talking about? You know, is there something that doesn't require blood? And what could that possibly be? And if that's true, why do I need Jesus? You know, suddenly you realize that we've actually been taking this verse completely out of context. The actual context is the blood of the covenant. Now Moses, after he has said all these laws, okay, it's in Exodus 25, he sprinkles blood on the people. It says he sprinkled blood on all the people. Well, of course, all in Hebrew doesn't mean all, because if Moses went around and sprinkled blood on all 3 million people, he would have A, run out of blood, B, run out of animals to kill blood, and C, ran out of time to do the whole darn thing. Okay. So it was just a group of elders, probably. And how many times does he sprinkle the blood of the covenant? Once. But what's in the covenant? Sacrifices. Right? So you have this one shedding of blood to ratify the covenant, but within the covenant, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, including sacrifices. And then there's Yeshua, Jesus, picks up the cup of wine and says, "This is my blood, which of the new covenant, which is shed for many, not everyone." It's exactly the same theology going on here, right? And just because Jesus sheds his blood doesn't mean you get to sin. It doesn't mean you get to disobey. It doesn't mean you're now in the covenant. In the covenant, there's checks and balances. There's consequences to actions. There's blessings and curses. There's, you know, all these things. And so I haven't quite figured out how to do a teaching on this without coming out sounding like I'm a heretic. So I'm being very careful, trying to figure out how to say it. But it'll get there eventually. Although I am going to be doing just a little video on Shavuot soon, because it's coming up, you know, right? It is we're in the last week. So, almost. Yesterday was Ascension Day. Well, it was here. And so then you have this, we were having this discussion, you're always having religious discussions in Israel, you might have noticed that, that, you know, the ascension of the Lord is incredibly pivotal, because now he stops. I mean, he starts doing other stuff, but he stops all his teaching, he's done. And he goes and he sits down and he starts interceding and doing all those kinds of things. But now it's humans have to get out and start doing the project. But we had 10 days between his ascension and Pentecost and Shavuot. And I, for the life of me, can't figure out why. Like, because like when you have 10 days of awe, 10 commandments, what are the other 10s? Like, and what's the significance of having to wait 10 days before getting the Spirit? Why? I mean, I still can't figure it out, guys. I don't know. Like, Jesus says, I go away and then the Father will send the Spirit. Took him 10 days. Like, holy heck, what were you doing up there? Jesus is here, everybody. Let's have a party. But tell us what it was like, man. They did what to you? That's terrible. You know, what were they doing up in heaven for 10 days? And why did the disciples have to? I mean, they were in the Galilee. Okay, so obviously to get back to Jerusalem, well, that's going to be a 3-day journey. Okay, I get that bit. 3 days could have been very Trinitarian, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But a 10-day trip. We're back in Israel. back in Jerusalem for the Pilgrim Festival. Of course, it's Shavuot, so they come down for the Pilgrim Festival as good Jews, because their master would have done it, so they do it. And then you get the outpouring of the Spirit. But anyway, if you've got any ideas, I would appreciate it. But it's not an easy one, because I just can't think of why you would have to take that amount of time essentially doing nothing, just moving from the Galilee to Jerusalem. Anyway.
Well, we were actually praying about that in our prayer call today.
Okay.
And I was actually thinking that same thing, you know. But even in this time that we're in right now, like what you're all talking about here, you know, the world and the state that we're in, that it's a time of anticipation. Like, can you imagine what the disciples were going through? And they would just be yearning for the gift of well, did they even know that it was the Holy Spirit, right? Jesus said, wait for what is I'm going to send to you.
You'll be baptized in power. Is what he said.
Yeah. And so even now, like the church should be anticipating, you know, during this time, what is the Lord going to be pouring out? So it's like we have to go through this time of wrestling and anticipation so that we're ready. Our hearts are ready. We're humbled and, you know, but why 10 specifically? Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting that, like you said, there's the Yom Teruah to Yom Kippur. I mean, that's significant.
I think so. I'm not quite sure why all the time. Still learning, obviously.
I have a question about the land. I know the land is very important to the Lord, and he owns all the land. When the land is desecrated through bloodshed or whatever, how is it cleansed?
That's okay. So there's several ways that it does it. Obviously, one, you can do your own cleansing service, like dedication and et cetera, and they do that, right? There was a whole way of dedicating the tabernacle, and Moses took like a whole week to do the whole thing. But in Leviticus, in 18, it describes how the land ejects sinners. Right, the land reacts, and it reacts rather poorly. It's like, you know, this is terrible. You get away from me, human. And it has mechanisms within itself to eject humans, and therefore it rests. And somehow within that process of resting, there's that the streams of refreshing and rededication and resanctification and all of those sorts of things. I'm always struck by Exodus 31:17, where it says, God rested on the Sabbath and he was refreshed. So this idea of actually having a Shemitah and a Jubilee and having a time being holy, somehow has a rejuvenating and cleansing effect. And it has it on our souls. But, you know, if you don't rest, something bad happens. But when you do rest, even your body recovers in some way. So there's some way of that holy time, of the Shemitah, of the Sabbath, of all those things, rejuvenating humans, and by extension also land, because land is just as important as human, and has and gets the same rules. So.
Thank you.
All right. Well, great, beautiful people. Thank you. Good to see you.